Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to be covering two primary topics. The first one is going to be the visit of the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to meet with the dictator from Baku a few days ago. And the second one is going to be what I call the week of the intelligence chiefs who have been visiting Armenia over the last 10 days, which is the head of the CIA, Mr. Burns, the head of the Russian Federation Foreign Intelligence Service, Sergei Narishkin, and the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council of Iran, Ali Shamkhani. So let's start off with the first one, which is what we call Ursula and the dictator. What came after the meeting between Ms. von der Leyen and the Azeri dictator was a series of tweets. So we're going to go over each of her tweets and look at what the key words are and what she's actually trying to say. In the first tweet, she talks about doubling the amount of gas that Europe is going to get from Azerbaijan. But she won't tell you what the exact truth is that that means maximum going from 1% of supplying European gas to 2%. So it's almost a negligible number, given that you're talking about making up a 40% loss of Russian gas. Let's move on to the second tweet. The key word here is Central Asia. Now, why does this matter? Because the only way that Azerbaijan is any kind of a useful conduit for natural gas to actually have an impact would be to get the much larger reserves that Turkmenistan has across the Caspian, through Azerbaijan, through Turkey, and into Europe. And minus that, this whole project doesn't mean a lot. On the next tweet, the key word is how this is going to help with gas shortages this winter. Well, that's just straight out lie. The fact is that this agreement, at best, will come to fruition 4 or 5 years from now and will have absolutely no impact on the shortages of gas in Western Europe this winter. The reality of the situation is that in the short run, there's actually no alternative to Russian gas because of the scale of the Russian gas production. And they supply close to 40 to 50% of natural gas to Europe. And depending on some certain countries, that number is much higher. The truth of the matter is that after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the West sort of declared war, economic war on Russia. But in the short run, it's very clear that the loser of that war has been the West. This could obviously change over the long run, but in the short run, it is the West that's paying the big economic price for this war. In summary, let's move on to what all of this means. What we have here is actually a lot of lying that's going on between all of these parties. Let's go back about what this gas line, the TANAP line, which Aliyev built about 10 years ago and completed a few years ago. This is actually a political project. It is designed to give political influence to him and his country through multiple countries like the EU and make his country much more important than it is. But in fact, it economically makes very little sense. They've spent about $10 billion on it. And the amount of gas that it's going to transport is minuscule as far as meeting the needs of any particular market. Let's go over the specifics in regards to this. Minus any new large gas findings in Azerbaijan, which this is not something that happens every day on a short run, they're about at maximum capacity. In fact, they've sort of peaked in their production about a year ago. So this is not a serious alternative to Russian gas. When you look at it structurally, the three primary buyers of the gas that's produced by Aliyev's state actually goes to three countries, his own, Georgia, and Turkey. And whatever is left over gets exported through the TANAP line. Now, what is also true is that in all of these three countries, gas consumption is going up. So whatever is going to be produced in any kind of an extra gas production is actually going to go to these markets first, and beyond that, it's not price-wise competitive. Secondly, this pipeline doesn't even have the capacity to actually reach anything beyond 2% of European use, because structurally it was not built like that. So in order to actually make Aliyev's state any kind of a serious alternative to Russian gas, you have to spend many more billions of dollars and many more years to actually increase that capacity. And ironically, most of the gas that Aliyev exports actually comes from the Shah Deniz field, which is actually owned in the 20th percentile by Lukoil, which is one of the primary oil and gas producers in Russia. Ironically, the other 10% is actually owned by the Iranian National Oil Company, which actually makes this really not an alternative to Russian gas. It's simply paying the Russians and Iranians in another format. Interesting side note to this, 10% of this field, of this 20% that Lukoil has, was actually bought a few days before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we must imagine that to be not coincidental. I want to close this section by pointing something out to Ms. van der Leyen, which is somewhat not exactly related, but I'll come back to how it is related. This was obviously a deliberate attempt to humiliate a woman in front of a world audience. And the following was her response in front of the European Parliament.
I have to conclude that it happened because I am a woman. Would this have happened if I had worn a suit and a tie? In the pictures of previous meetings, I did not see any shortage of chairs. But then again, I did not see any women in these pictures neither.
Now, why is this relevant, and why am I pointing this out, and what does Erdogan have to do with this? Well, the truth of it is that the TANAP line and all lines coming out of Aliyev's state actually flow through Turkey. And one of the supposed objectives of the European Union of the West is not to have any strongmen or dictators have a stranglehold on your energy supplies. Well, in reality, as if these gas lines actually multiply through Turkey, or the volume goes up, you're essentially moving on to Erdogan gas, as I call it. And Erdogan gas means that that dictator in Ankara is going to get to blackmail you whenever he wants you to do something politically. So you're actually not solving any problems by going through the creating new lines through Aliyev's states, through Ankara. You're just going from a smaller problem to actually a much bigger one. Now, what can we learn from all of this impressive lying that's going on, from the dictator in Baku to our friends in the EU? First one is to learn from it and actually be impressed by their ability to carry this out. And the second one is to understand that this is actually a significant victory for Aliyev, because essentially it's his political project that's paying off. No matter how much of it is smoke and mirrors, it's actually paying off. What is it that we need to do, which is actually something we've never done, which is to constantly marry the dictator from Baku with the dictator from Ankara. Any projects, any energy projects that are coming through should from this point on be referred to as Erdogan gas, because that's what it is, and he's the man who's going to control what goes to Europe or what country, and that's not a power that you want him to have. Now, why do we want to highlight Erdogan and his ties to Aliyev? First of all, they proclaim it all the time. You know, they're always bragging about being, two fascist states, one people, so we should obviously highlight that. And we need to understand that in the current Western imagination, you know, on the list of bad guys, you have Putin on top, and then Xi Jinping, and then the third one is actually Erdogan. So the more we actually link Erdogan to his degenerate cousin in Baku, the better off we are politically. Now we're going to move on to the second topic of the week, which is the very interesting visitors that we've had over the last 10 days. About 10 days ago, Rear Admiral Ali Shamkhani paid a two-day visit to Armenia, during which he met with the Prime Minister and the head of the National Security Council. And he is the Secretary of the Supreme National Council of Iran, and he's actually known to be closely tied to the IRGC, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and one of the primary, if not the primary, power player behind the scenes. So this was an actually very interesting meeting. This came a couple of months after the IRGC actually put out videos talking about defending Armenia's territorial integrity. Now, his meeting was followed up a couple of days later by perhaps the most interesting visitor that we had, which was the head of the CIA, William Burns, who made a visit to Armenia. During his visit, he met with the Prime Minister and the head of the National Security Council, in which they supposedly discussed Armenia's negotiations with Azerbaijan, with Turkey and other matters, and fighting terrorism, which to me doesn't really jive with reality. I do not think that the head of the CIA needs to travel all the way to Armenia to have those conversations. And there's a lot of speculation that he was actually here to have meetings with third parties that are not Armenia. Obviously, we're a sort of an island in this world in which many of these different powers that actually don't get along have good relationships with us. So this is actually a natural place to have a meeting with your adversaries. Who he met with, obviously, this is not something that we are privy to. This meeting actually was followed up 2 days ago by the director of the Russian Foreign Intelligence, Sergei Narishkin, who visited Armenia also. Obviously, we don't know the details of what came out of it. Now, what is it that we need to understand from this? And actually, if you look at this, the most interesting of these visitors is actually the visit of the CIA director. The second possibility of the reasons for Mr. Burns' visit, as we said, the first one, which is likely some kind of a meeting with a third party, is what's going on between U.S.-Iran relations, or lack thereof, or actually the triangle of Iran, Israel, and the United States. And there's a couple of things that are going on in the atmospherics that tell us that this could actually be the case and the reason that they were here. A few days before Mr. Burns' visit, there was a statement put out by the U.S. National Security Council, Sullivan, accusing Iran of selling attack drones to Russia to be used in Ukraine. And given the context of the sort of the animosity towards Russia, by bringing in Iran into that equation, you're actually making it much harder to make any kind of a deal because it increases the opposition to any deal. Secondly, during President Biden's visit to Israel, he actually made it very clear that the IRGC is not going to be listed from the terrorism list, which was one of the primary Iranian conditions. Now, what this actually means is that in real terms, the United States is ready to walk away from these negotiations with Iran on its civilian nuclear program. All of this obviously increases the likelihood of war, because if the Iranian government has no incentive to have sanctions lifted, they have absolutely no incentive to cooperate in limiting their nuclear program, which obviously makes the likelihood of a war much greater. One of the more interesting and curious statements that came out immediately after the two U.S. ones was a statement put out by Kamal Karazi, who was a former Iranian foreign minister and a close advisor to the Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, in which he said that Iran is a nuclear threshold state, which means that they have the capacity to build nuclear weapons, but they have yet to make a decision to make one or not. Now, why is this important? Because in the history of the past 20 years of this controversy, there's never been a time that anyone related to the power structure in that country has ever mentioned this fact. They've always said this is it's a civilian nuclear program. It has nothing to do with the military. And what this likely means is that this is sort of a warning that if you push us, this is where we're going to go, or if you attack us, this is where we're going to go, or we're very close to going there, so you should not be attacking us. In close, any such confrontation, any such war between Israel, the United States, Iran, and all these other proxy countries is actually going to be disastrous for the economics and politics of the region. And depending on its length, it's likely to, one of the easiest impacts is going to send hundreds of thousands, if not more, refugees going in different directions. And obviously, a good chunk of them will be heading in our direction. Obviously, this is something that we hope never comes to pass. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Insights.